All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive deep into focusing.
Always ready.
Today, we're going way beyond just making those photos sharper. We're going to use this photography lesson document to figure out how to take control and make some artistic choices.
It's really exciting stuff.
I know, right? Like, did you know our cameras actually kind of mimic how our eyes work?
Oh, yeah. It's pretty wild how that all comes together.
But we'll get into that a bit later. First, I'm curious, what do you think is like the most interesting thing about focusing in terms of photography?
For me, it all boils down to storytelling.
Storytelling, okay, I like
Yeah, because you're not just, making things sharp. You're actually deciding what's going to grab the viewer's attention and what just kind of fades away.
it. So like in focus versus out of focus, it's not just about how crisp things are.
Nope.
It's about choosing what's important, what's the star.
Exactly. You pick what's the star of the show, and sometimes that means letting other elements kind of just melt into the background,
Become less important, yeah.
Yeah, give them that soft, blurry look.
It's like choosing what details we pay attention to.
Exactly. Think of it this way. You know how a painter uses light and shadow to guide your eye? It's the same idea.
Oh, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Photographers, we use focus to do the same thing. It's all about emphasis, creating that mood, that feeling.
Our source uses this cool example. Imagine you're taking someone's portrait, okay?
I can picture it.
And behind them is this incredible, huge vista, mountains, whatever.
Yeah, I love those shots.
So how do you make sure you get what you want in focus there?
Well, that's where aperture comes in.
Aperture, right.
A wide aperture, say f2.8, it's going to give you that super shallow depth of field.
Okay, so things are going to be blurry except for a tiny bit.
Right, so you get to choose. Is your subject like super sharp and the background all dreamy and creamy?
I love
Yeah.
that look.
Or is it the other way around? Maybe the background's sharp and they're a bit hazy.
Ooh, that's a cool idea too.
It is. It depends on what you're going for.
What if I want it all in focus? The person and the background.
Then we're talking narrow aperture, like f16 or even smaller. Everything nice and tack sharp.
I see. So it's all about that choice. How much is in focus?
And that's where your artistry comes in. Isolation or context, you get to choose this story.
So to actually get this focus stuff happening, there's that classic method, manual focus.
Oh yeah, the old school way.
I gotta admit, I kind of love that hands-on feeling.
It's definitely got its appeal, that tactile feedback. But in practice, honestly, it's a lot slower and less precise than our modern autofocus.
Especially if you're out in the field, right?
Exactly. Out in the field, forget about it. You're basically trying to beat a computer.
Yeah, trying to focus manually on a cheetah running. Good luck with that.
You'd need superhuman reflexes.
But hey, our source actually points out some places where manual focus is still a winner.
Oh, definitely. There are absolutely times when it's the best choice.
Like when?
Well, think about a studio setting. Everything's controlled, your subject's perfectly still.
Ah, I get it. Like for product photography.
Exactly. You want every little detail tack sharp, and manual focus can give you a level of precision that autofocus sometimes misses. Macro work too, when you're super close up.
That makes sense. So when those tiny details really matter.
You nailed it. And the source lays out this really neat technique. You zoom in on your subject in live view, right on the screen, and you actually check the sharpness at a pixel level.
Wow, so you can see it up close.
Yeah, then you zoom back out and shoot.
There's a real sense of control there.
Almost like a little ritual, It's a nice feeling.
Okay, that's awesome. So we've got manual focus, but now let's talk about the game changer.
You're talking autofocus.
That's right. It's almost like a superpower, especially for stuff that's moving fast.
And get this, there's a system that works a lot like our own eyes. It's called phase detection autofocus.
Whoa, hold on. Cameras are copying our eyeballs now. How does that even work?
It's pretty cool, actually. Have you ever done that thing where you look at your finger, one eye closed, then switch eyes?
Yeah, your finger seems to jump.
Exactly. Our eyes see the world from slightly different angles. Our brain combines those images to figure out depth.
That's how we know how far away things are.
Right. And phase detection autofocus does something similar.
So my camera's like a little brain, figuring out distances.
You got it. Light enters the lens and hits two separate sensors, like two little eyes.
And the camera compares what those two sensors see.
Exactly. It calculates the distance and then boom, the lens moves just the right amount to snap that photo into focus.
Wow, all in a fraction of a second.
Technology is wild, right?
No wonder those focusing speeds are so crazy fast. And that's probably why our source says a lot of entry-level cameras use a different method.
You're talking about contrast detection.
Is that it? Yeah.
Yep. It's a lot cheaper to include, but not quite as advanced. It searches for the sharpest contrast, but it can be slower, especially in low light.
So like a cheetah versus a turtle? Kinda.
Haha, good analogy. Phase detection's that cheetah, contrast detection's the turtle.
But both systems are still amazing in their own way.
Absolutely, and even the pros still use contrast detection sometimes.
So it's like choosing the right tool for what you need.
Right, exactly. Now, even with all this fancy autofocus stuff, you still get to choose what's important, what gets focused on. That's where focus points come in.
Right, those little diamond shapes in the viewfinder. I was wondering about those.
Well, those are basically targets you can give your camera, you can let it decide, or you take control and pick.
So I can tell the camera exactly what to focus on.
Exactly, like imagine you're photographing a rabbit in the forest, right?
Okay, cute rabbit, dense
If
trees.
you let the camera choose, it might grab onto a leaf or a branch in the foreground instead of that cute bunny.
Oh, that's happened to me. So frustrating.
Yeah, so you gotta use a focus point directly on that rabbit.
Got it. Makes sense to pick the point yourself.
And sometimes, just using one single focus point is best.
Why is that?
It's all about accuracy, especially that center point.
The center was extra good.
Usually, yeah, it's the most sensitive and reliable. Little pro tip for you.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got regular focus points, but our document also mentions cross-type ones. What are those?
Oh, those are like the elite athletes of focus points, haha.
Fancy. What makes them so special?
They detect contrast changes in two directions, horizontally A and D, vertically. So they're way faster, way more accurate.
So if I'm trying to photograph like a bird in flight, I'd want to use those.
You bet. For action, sports, anything moving fast, those are your friends.
It's like they're predicting where the action is going.
Exactly. They can keep up with those super quick movements, but double check your camera's manual. Not all cameras have a ton of them.
Okay, good to know. It's all about knowing your gear right there.
Absolutely. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about the motors that drive your autofocus. We've got ultrasonic motors and STM.
This is where I usually get lost. Motors and stuff. Can you make it simple?
Sure, think of it this way. The motor is what actually movies the lens to get that focus. Some are fast, some are smooth, just like car engines.
So a slow motor equals slow focusing.
You got it. And that can make or break a shot, especially if things are moving quickly.
Right, you missed the moment because your lens was too slow.
Exactly. Ultrasonic motors, those are known for speed and precision. Action, sports, wildlife, that's where they shine.
Makes sense. They need to be fast to keep up.
Right. And then you have STM, which stands for stepper motor. They might not be as lightning fast, but they are smooth and silent.
Silent. That's important for some types of shooting.
Hugely important, especially for video. Like, imagine you're filming a wedding ceremony and your lens is whirring every time it refocuses.
Oh yeah, that would be super distracting in a quiet moment.
Right. STM gives you that smooth, silent focusing, so your video is nice and clean.
So the right motor depends on what you're shooting, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of having the right settings, we got to talk about the different focus modes. This is important.
Yeah, the document mentions 3.
Yep.
AFS, AFC, and AFA. It's like different driving modes, but for your camera.
I like that analogy, very visual. Okay, so AFS, that's single shot autofocus. You focus, you half press the shutter, it locks in, like setting your cruise control.
So that's good for things that aren't moving, like landscapes.
Exactly. Portraits, landscapes, anything still. Then you've got AFC, continuous autofocus. This one's more like switching to sports mode.
Okay, so this one's for things that are moving.
You got it. It tracks your subject and keeps adjusting the focus on the fly, birds in flight, that kind of thing.
So if I'm at a soccer game or something, AFC is the way to go.
Exactly. Anything moving fast, AFC is your best friend.
Okay, that makes sense. What about that last one, AFA?
That one's like autopilot. It tries to guess what to use, AFS or AFC, based on if it sees movement.
So it's trying to be helpful.
It is. It's good for beginners, maybe, but as you get more experience, you'll want to pick the mode yourself for more control.
Yeah, it makes sense. Wow, we just went through a lot. Manual focus, autofocus, focus points, motors, modes. It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot, but it's all super important stuff to know if you want to really master focusing.
It's like the more you know, the more creative you can be with your photography.
Exactly, and that's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. Now, I'm ready for part 2 of this deep dive. What do you say we take a quick break and come back to explore even more about focusing?
Sounds like a plan. I'm excited to share more about the creative side of focusing.
Stay tuned, everyone.
You know, when I
We'll be
first
right
started
back.
out, I thought focusing was all about the technical stuff, like learning all the settings and everything.
I feel that
Yeah.
it can be overwhelming.
But the more I shot, the more I realized it was about vision. It's about having an idea in your head.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
It's like, Once you know how to use the tools, the real art is knowing how and when to use them to make your vision a reality.
And sometimes that means breaking the rules, right?
Absolutely.
Like what if I want to blur the background to make a portrait pop?
Exactly. Or maybe you play with that selective focus and you can create this sense of mystery in the image.
Ooh, I like that.
It's all about making those choices to enhance your story.
So we've talked a lot about how focus works, right?
We have.
But how does all this fit into composition?
That's where it gets really fun.
Okay, tell me more.
Remember those focus points we were talking about?
Yeah, the little diamonds in the viewfinder?
Those aren't just technical targets, they're compositional tools too.
Oh, interesting.
Think about it, instead of letting the camera decide what's sharp, I can use those points to make the viewer look where I want them to look.
So I can control where the eye goes in the picture.
Exactly. Like, think of the rule of thirds, where you don't put your subject in the center.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
You can use a focus point off to the side, and suddenly the composition is way more interesting.
More dynamic, yeah.
Exactly. And it works with other things too, like leading lines or patterns.
Oh, I see. I can make those elements stand out by making sure they're in focus.
Yep. It all comes down to what you want to highlight in your image.
The document mentions something called focus stacking. Is that related to this?
Ugh.
Yes, focus stacking. That's a really cool technique.
I don't know much about it.
Basically, you take multiple photos of the same scene,
Okay.
but each photo focuses on a different point, then you blend them all together on the computer.
So you can have like the foreground and the background in focus.
Exactly. Even if you're using a wide aperture.
That sounds super useful for landscapes.
It's popular for landscapes, macro photography, product photography, anything where you need everything to be sharp.
It sounds a little complicated.
It does take some effort, but the results are worth it.
Yeah.
And there's software that can do it automatically now.
That makes it easier.
It does, for sure.
Okay, so we've talked about the technical stuff, the creative stuff, even some advanced techniques.
We have.
But what about common mistakes people make with focusing?
That's a great question because everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the biggest ones is not paying attention to your focus points. Like we said earlier, leaving it up to the camera can lead to some surprises. Yeah, I've definitely had times where I thought I was focused on the right thing,
Yeah.
but the camera picked something else entirely.
It happens, so always double check those focus points, especially in tricky situations like low light or really busy background.
Good tip. I'll try to remember that.
And another mistake is using the wrong autofocus mode for the situation, like trying to shoot action with single shot autofocus.
Oh yeah, that won't work well.
Nope, if anything's moving, you need continuous autofocus.
Got it, AFC for action.
Exactly, and don't be afraid to experiment with those settings. See what works best for you and your camera.
Practice makes perfect.
It really does. The more you shoot, the better you'll get at focusing.
The document also mentions practicing regularly.
Absolutely. Treat it like any skill you're trying to learn.
Makes sense.
The more you practice, the more it becomes second nature.
What about when things just don't work out?
Troubleshooting time.
What do I do if my photos just aren't sharp no matter what?
First thing, check your shutter speed, especially if you're shooting handheld.
Yeah, I've definitely had blurry photos because of shaky hands.
It happens to all of us. You need to make sure that shutter speed is fast enough to avoid camera shake.
So how fast is fast enough?
Good rule of thumb, use a shutter speed at least as fast as your lens focal length.
Okay, so if I'm using a 50mm lens, I need at least 150th of a second.
Exactly, and if you're in low light, don't be afraid to bump up that ISO to get a faster shutter speed.
Right, but higher ISO means more noise.
It's a trade-off sometimes.
Gotta find that balance.
Exactly. And the other thing to consider is your lens.
The lens itself.
Yep, some lenses are just sharper than others.
So if I'm really serious about sharp photos,
invest in a good lens, it makes a difference.
noted. And even with a great lens, I still need to focus properly.
Absolutely. Use the right autofocus mode, the right focus points, hold that camera steady. All of it
It's
matters.
like a whole system.
It is. You've got the gear, you've got the settings, and you've got your technique.
It all has to work together.
And the more you practice, the better you'll get at anticipating those focusing challenges and overcoming them.
You know what I'm realizing?
What's that?
All this technical stuff about focus is actually making me more creative.
That's the
Because I'm
goal.
not just randomly trying things anymore.
Exactly. Once you understand the fundamentals, you can start breaking the rules in interesting ways.
Like intentionally blurring things or using focus to highlight certain subjects.
You got it. It's all about using focus to tell your story.
This has been super helpful. I feel like I understand focusing so much better now.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, the best way to learn is to actually
Get out there and shoot.
Exactly. Experiment, try new things. Don't be afraid to mess up. That's how you learn.
Okay, I'm inspired to go take some pictures now. What about you?
Absolutely. Let's go make some magic.
You know, it's amazing how much there is to focusing.
I know,
We
right?
just point the camera and expect it to do its thing, but there's a whole world behind how it actually works.
It's true, and we haven't even touched on some of the really advanced stuff.
Oh yeah, like what?
Like face detection or eye tracking. Some cameras can even follow your subject's eyes.
That's crazy.
It's really impressive technology.
But even with all that tech, I still love using manual focus sometimes.
Oh, me too.
It's just different.
There's something about it that really connects you to the process.
It's like you're more involved in the image making.
Exactly. You're not just letting the camera do everything. You're making conscious choices.
Speaking of choices, remember that challenge from the photography lesson document?
Exercise number 3, manual focus only.
That one. Have you ever tried shooting an entire roll like that?
I have, actually. I try to do it every once in a while.
So you just switch your lens to manual and go for it.
Yep. It's a great way to sharpen my skills.
What kind of things do you notice when you shoot in manual focus?
Well, the first thing is I have to slow down.
Yeah, that's
I can't just be snapping away. I have to really think about each shot.
like composing carefully.
Exactly. And making sure my focus is spot on.
No room for error.
Not really, which is good. It makes me pay attention to details I might otherwise miss.
Like what kind of details?
Like how the light is hitting my subject, or how the depth of field changes when I adjust the aperture.
It's like you're more aware of everything.
I am. It's almost meditative.
I like that. A mindfulness practice for photography.
Exactly. You're really in the moment with each shot.
So it's not just a technical thing, it's a way to see the world differently.
I think so. It helps me appreciate the little things.
That's beautiful.
It is. And, it all comes back to storytelling.
Oh, there it is again.
It's the heart of photography for me, whether you're using the latest autofocus or your own 2 eyes. It's about making choices that bring your vision to life.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a new appreciation for focusing.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's not just about sharp photos, it's about making creative choices.
You got it. And the best part is the learning never stops.
There's always more to discover.
Exactly. So keep experimenting, keep pushing yourself, and don't be afraid to try new things.
Solid advice. Well, I think that about wraps up our exploration of focusing.
It's been a fun one.
It has. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.
And until then, keep shooting. And remember, the most important thing is to have fun with it.